Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to tonight's webinar. My name is Tamara Amin, and I am a Program Officer of Research Grants at KFAS and your moderator for this evening. Tonight's webinar will be on the topic of research data management. This is an essential tool for all researchers, as well as something that is becoming of increasing importance to funding agencies, including KFAS. The webinar tonight will consist of a presentation followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A. Please feel free to leave your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the KFAS YouTube channel, and a copy of the slides will be sent to you after the conclusion of the event. I'd also like to remind you that there is a survey at the end of the event for you to kindly fill out. Our presenter for this evening is Dr. Angus Whyte. Hi, Dr. Whyte. Dr. Whyte is a senior research data specialist at the Digital Curation Center out of the University of Edinburgh since 2007. He is responsible for developing online guidance and consultancy to research organizations to support them in developing skills and capacities in research data service provision. He has co-led the Policy and Practice WP in FAIR is FAIR since 2020 and previously led the development of the skills framework FAIR for Us in the European Open Science Cloud Pilot Project. So Dr. Whyte, I'll now leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Thank you so much for the invitation to present this evening on the topic of data management for researchers. An outline of my talk this evening. After a few introductory comments, I want to first deal with fundamental questions about what are data management plans, why funders are asking for them, why they're a good thing anyway, regardless of that. Then about half of the presentation is concerning the first 2 points, and some practical guidance on how to get started with data management plans, whether you're a researcher or a provider of professional support to researchers. And I'll then talk very briefly about data management planning tools that can help with this and some of the future challenges around this as we get on to discussion. So as Tamara said, and I don't want to spend too much time repeating what she just said, I'm formerly a researcher. I joined Digital Curation Center in Edinburgh in 2007. We're an international centre of expertise on building capacity in this area, and we're a provider of one of the tools to support data management planning called DMP Online. My role was really involved three main things: training and consultancy to organisations, first in the UK, like London School of Economics, a number of other organisations, providing guidance publications. There are references to some of these in the final slides in the presentation, and some of the frameworks for assessing skills and capabilities that were mentioned earlier. I'm also a contributor to a number of working groups in this area, one on active data management plans in the Research Data Alliance and the Skills and Training Working Group of the European Open Science Cloud. Enough of me just now. I'm interested in what your role is and your interest in data management planning. And I see some of the answers coming in already, with most people so far saying they're interested in writing a data management plan for a future project. So guessing that there are many researchers on the call, which is great. And some of you also on supporting researchers and on considering the policy implications. Any further responses? I think we can leave that open, but I'll carry on with the next slide. So a data management plan, and a lot of this is really common sense, is a short description covering what data will be created or reused if you're using secondary data, how it will be described, how it will be organized, stored and backed up during the project, and how that access to data will be maintained after the project, and how it will be shared with others as appropriate. Data management plans may be needed as part of a grant application, but I'm hoping that you'll agree, at least at the end of this, that data management plans are useful regardless of whether funders require it in any research context that requires data. Many funders in Europe are starting to require data management plans. They were introduced in the UK around 2011, although some of the funders have required them since around 2005. The European Commission in Europe has led policy development in this area. The NSF in the States, increasing number of funders worldwide, South Africa and China also are starting to introduce requirements in this area. Some funders expect them to be published as a project deliverable at the end of the project, typically. Some funders check them, and there's increasing focus or expectation that institutions will take some of the responsibility for checking the content of the plan and the sharing of data subsequently is consistent with the plan. When we talk about research data management in this context, this has really emerged as an applied research domain in its own right in the last 10 years or so, and typically uses quite idealized generic models of research life cycles like this. There's many definitions. One that we use here is the active management and appraisal of data over the life cycle of scholarly and scientific interest. And the keywords there really are active, appraisal, and life cycle. So it's a conscious process, and one that involves iterative checking and appraisal of progress throughout the project. We all, as researchers, have an intimate knowledge of our own research data, and you don't need me to tell you what it is. But in this context, it helps to have generic definitions, and one that's been especially influential in the UK and elsewhere is the OECD one, which originally appeared in their recommendation back in 2006, which is, as you can see here, an emphasis on factual records, resulting from research that's publicly funded. And an acknowledgement that definitions vary according to the domain, of course. But it's anything that underpins the findings of research. The motivation since at least the turn of the century has been to address issues as research has become more digital, and particularly to ensure a return on the investment of public funds in data. To try and address the concerns about access and reuse, which have remained low, and the costs of duplicating data, particularly storage and repetition of data that's already been collected. And with an emphasis on principles of fair data, that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable according to standards, and reusable at the end of the project. The European Commission commissioned a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers a couple of years ago on the costs of not having fair data, which estimated that even on those two concerns about storage and time spent searching for data, the costs they estimate at more than 9 billion a year to the European public purse. As the OECD were reviewing their recommendation a couple of years ago, they did a survey of policy advisors from national governments. And the results of that were quite interesting because they asked people to rate the extent to which they saw various factors that they'd mentioned as still relevant, and the extent to which they should be a focus of policy effort. Data management planning was top of the list there. It has really become a key focus because of historical lack of planning in making data sets available for reuse. The links to these materials, by the way, are at the foot of the slide, and these slides will be available afterwards. So, I mean, regardless of the funder concern of getting a return on the investment, research societies and others are obviously concerned about the value of planning for research itself. It's increasingly seen as good project management. As with any aspect of project management, risks need to be assessed and mitigated, and having a well-documented plan helps when there's risks of staff leaving, so that others can pick up where they've left off. And it can be helpful for research groups to set a standard locally on how generic standards will be applied, so that others joining the team can acquire the necessary expertise. The costs of duplicating effort are also relevant, of course, for institutions. And everyone is concerned, of course, with the reproducibility of research, and to avoid the dread of having accusations of fraud or malpractice or errors that might result in papers being retracted. There's the emphasis on sharing, on making data as open as possible, and as European Commission emphasise, as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And on making sure that in years ahead, you yourself as a researcher can find the data and reuse it and get credit for sharing it with others. So, as I said, much of this is common sense, but I think there are 7 steps that you can consider to get started with data management planning. There are now some very good guides to research data management, some of which are in the references, and use generic research data lifecycle models. So a good step, as with any plan, is to start from the outcomes you want and the outputs that you expect from the project, and work backwards, identifying what the data has to do to fulfill your objectives, how that where that data is going to come from, how it's going to accumulate value as it goes through the steps required to fulfill the use cases you have for data. Define what needs to be documented and checked against what quality criteria. Think about the actions you need to take to respond to the checks that need to be performed. Will there be outliers in any numeric data that you can check for statistically? If you're using qualitative approaches, how are you going to ensure you have the richness that you need to get to your findings? And when you consider what data you'll need to retain, what's required to explain the steps you've taken to others, what software will be dependent on, will there be any protocols that you've used that you need to provide the context for that. And when you've drafted the plan, I think it's important not to be afraid of change. And this quote often comes up in any discussion of planning. The importance is in the planning itself. The plan can be expected to change, as we all know from the last year. Even the most applied research has to deal with unexpected outcomes. Basic research is inherently exploratory, and you have to expect that plans will change. But the key thing is to be able to account for those changes and to describe what's happened. And it's good practice to expect to review and update the plan at least a couple of times during the project, and some funders indeed require this. And rather than think of the plan as a compliance exercise, even though that's often what it is, think of the plan as a statement of the support that the project will need as it unfolds. Don't delegate it to the data specialist in your team without expecting it to be collaborative undertaking that involves consultation with your peer network, your collaborators, and with the support services in your institution. And for the support services, the data management plan is a really good focus to bring people together, whether they're from library services or from the research office, from the IT service, or from other specialist advice areas, such as intellectual property or ethics and security. And another key thing is to make use of the resources that are already available out there. There's a great deal that is available, regardless of where you are, and it's free at point of use. It's a good thing in making the plan to make it clear when you're using standards that have been published. There's really good resources from the Research Data Alliance on metadata standards that may be relevant to your research. There's the fairsharing.org guide is an excellent source of information about semantic standards for describing research, for ontologies and vocabularies that can make the data more actionable and reusable, and on standards that you can use to describe it and the formats that will help ensure it can be sustained. At the end of the project, it's good practice to use domain repositories. The Re3 data directory is a great resource for finding relevant repositories, particularly if your institution doesn't have capabilities to preserve data itself. This is a great challenge for institutions globally, and there are platforms available for generic repositories where you can't find one that particularly fits your domain. It's also very helpful, I think, to refer to examples. And there are people who say you shouldn't do this because it's very tempting to just cut and paste from previous plans and not really think about what you have to do in your own project. But as in any field where you're learning, it is helpful to refer to previous examples. And there's an increasing number available on the DCC site. We have some plans that have been published from previous projects. The project Open Air has a very useful collection that's recently been published from European Commission Horizon 2020 projects. There are over 800 collected at that link on the slide there. Humanities data management plans were released a few years ago by the American National Endowment for the Humanities, and that's another good collection there. Again, these are from projects that have been funded, so they should, in theory, be good plans. They're not always. So as well as referring to previous examples, it's useful to refer to practical guides on writing the data management plan. We publish a checklist and a guide that's available on our website. There are others available, of course. And as well as those kinds of guides, it's helpful to have guidance on how to review a plan, particularly if you're on the support side. Science Europe's an association of European research funders, and recently, a few months ago, in fact, published a DMP evaluation rubric, which sets out for each of the questions that they ask in their data management plan template, what criteria a reviewer can apply to give feedback on a plan. And of course, if you're writing the plan yourself, it's helpful to know what reviewers will look for. Tools to write the plan are something we also recommend. As I said, we have an interest in this as a provider of one of the leading tools. DMP Online is something we've been providing in Digital Creation Center since 2010, and it now has users worldwide. The main offering of DMP Online is to give templates for the questions that funders expect you to answer. Sorry, and it includes guidance from a number of sources, and you can pick and choose from sources available. It's not the only tool. Data Stewardship Wizard is another that's been developed by the Elixir research infrastructure for the life sciences. It has a different way of presenting things. It uses what they call knowledge models, which are highly structured question and answer knowledge bases. And like DMP Online, it's available as a cloud offering, or you can deploy it locally in your institution. RDM Organizer is a tool that's been developed in Germany by the German funder DFG, and is used by a consortium of German research organizations. It takes a slightly different focus again, extracting from the plans a task list that you can work with. And it's not available as a cloud offering, but it's open source, and you can deploy it on that basis locally. The common features of these tools really are that they offer the templates the funders expect to be answered. They offer guidance from various sources on how to answer those questions, and they help you to share with others, and you can define user groups to share your plan with, to get their contribution, or to share with a reviewer to get their feedback. The accounts are generally free to use, and you can also customize them to your institution. A feature that's increasingly the focus of the DMP tool providers is to make these plans more machine actionable. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but to go back to the idea that the plan is a statement of what you need in the project by way of support. Having that plan in a machine readable format can help other systems to make use of the plan to identify relevant services. It can help avoid the pain of having to re-key information that you've already provided to, for example, a grant information system. It can help to your institution to provision for the storage requirements that you might have. It can help integrate with sources of information on metadata that can be relevant, give you advice on repositories, and so on. This is an area of hot development, and there's an interest group in the Research Data Alliance working on this, using a standard that's been quite recently published. That group's open to anyone to join, and you're very welcome to join it. I thought it'd be useful to kick off a discussion and questions you might have to think about the challenges that you see for institutions in Kuwait. Maybe they're with coordinating the skills that people need. This is often one of the first things that institutions need to address, how to bring people together to define the service offering. It might be with mitigating risks to data security, making sure that the research is reproducible, or it might be that you recognize the potential value in being able to reanalyze data through data mining and data science. There are challenges for everyone in incentivizing data management, and the answer may very well be all of the above. And I can see already that this is the top answer so far. And we have 10 answers come in so far. Feel free to keep answering that question. I have another question, if there are no other answers to that one. So thinking about your own research or the research that you support, I wonder what you see as the main benefit to expect from data management planning. Maybe it's establishing standards within your research group. Maybe it's dealing with the costs to avoid surprises in that area. Maybe it's ensuring the access is appropriate. That you deal with data privacy concerns there, and maybe it's with getting credit for the effort that you put into that. Or again, maybe it's with all of these. I see already that there are answers coming in on that. More responses coming in. Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you very much for listening to this. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my colleagues in DCC and point you to some further reading. There's some links here to further information sources, and I'm happy to follow up if you have any requests for information that I haven't already covered. So I wonder if we have any questions.
All right there. So thank you so much, Dr. Whyte. That was extremely informative. We're on the Q&A session right now, so I'm going to select some questions that we've received. There's a question from Wafa. Are there any principal-specific templates? For example, specific templates for education. What if the funder does not ask for a plan? How can I choose the best plan that would suit the purposes of the project?
I would say the Science Europe guide is a helpful template to use if you haven't got any specific requirement from your funder. I know the foundation is considering this. There may be guidance to come in future. The Science Europe guide, or indeed the DCC checklist, is another template that you can use.
So she asks if you possibly have an example of a real plan. So do you have a suggestion for like a link or something that perhaps we could share with them in the chat?
There were a number in the slides earlier. So I can.
How about we get back to that if it's difficult, and we can maybe maybe when they get access to the slides, hopefully if they get access to the slides, then they can be able to see those examples. And you also mentioned the DCC checklist, which is available on the DCC website, correct?
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I'm having some difficulty with my screen as it's enlarged to an extent that I can't type into the chat.
Okay, so for now, we'll just say that you can check out the DCC checklist, which should provide a structure, correct, for most DMPs.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great. Another question that we've received is, can you give an example from a real project of how this is used and beneficial? What performance indicators can be measured using that?
Performance measures for the
effectiveness of DMPs, why they're beneficial.
I would say that the key indicator that most funders are interested in is whether the data has been shared at the end of the project, or at least a metadata record for that. So data can't be made public in every case, but what funders expect to see is a metadata record on a public source that describes what the data is that relates to any published findings. And that's generally the key thing that's looked for.
And I believe there might also be at least one study that suggests that data that is shared widely tends to have more citations. So having a DMP where you're very clear on how you're going to share your data could help in that regard.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it should have an indirect impact on your ability later in the project to share the data, and that then has an impact on your citations and the impact on from your research.
Great. Another question we've received is, can you give a real example of how the presented tools might be useful to researchers in Kuwait, specifically since some of the research projects in Kuwait are not very big? So how can DMPs be useful even if your project is very small?
I think if your project is small, the chances of you having a specialist who's got time specifically on the project is probably less. Therefore, your need to get support is likely to be higher. So having that plan in place at the start of the project should help you avoid risks and get specialist advice on the standards that might be relevant and the repositories that you can use. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. This is the last one we've received from the audience. If I want more experience about managing data, where can I join to get certification? So what are the sources for certification or for additional educational resources to learn more about this?
Certification, mean in terms of training or? Seems
so.
That's a good question. There's this is something that's really there's not a great deal of certified training available. There's a lot of training available. DCC provides a MOOC course, which is you can get a certificate for. We're actually running a new round of that in September, so it's a great time to sign up for that. That's about developing the research data management service. There's also a MOOC course available from Technical University of Delft, TU Delft, on data management. There are courses from a number of the research infrastructures in Europe. So depending on what your domain is, for example, for social sciences, the CESDA research infrastructure provides a lot of training. The Elixir provides a lot of training for life sciences, and similarly for each of the main domain areas, there's training courses available. And you can find some references of sources in the slides.
Great. I think we'll take this very last question, and I think that's all we have time for. Are there any books you can recommend to start reading before starting a DMP?
There's a book that I co-edited with DCC colleagues called Delivering Research Data Management Services, which is a useful source if you're supporting data management plans. If you're writing a data management plan, I would recommend the guide from CESDA, which is, bear with me a second, the exact title is CESDA Data Management Expert Guide, or again, the Science Europe guide that I mentioned earlier is also a very useful reference source.
Great. I believe that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Dr. Whyte, for this presentation. Thank you again to the audience for joining us this evening. A reminder for everyone that at the end of this event, there is a survey for you to please kindly fill out that helps us give you guys the best webinars we can. And I think that's it. Thank you so much, Dr. Whyte.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much to the audience for your interest and participation.
Great.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.